The allure of the Arctic had always fascinated me. The untouched beauty, the vast expanses of snow, and the promise of witnessing the ethereal dance of the northern lights. So, when I had the chance to join an excursion to the Arctic Circle, I jumped at it. Little did I know this trip would unravel a chilling nightmare beyond my imagination. We were a small group of 6, led by Eric, an experienced Arctic guide. Along with me were Sarah and Tom, a couple from New York, Lena, a photographer from Germany, and siblings, Alex and Mia, from Canada. We arrived at our base camp in Svalbard, the starting point of our journey into the Arctic wilderness. The air was crisp, and the snow crunched beneath our boots as we prepared for the adventure ahead. On our second night out on the tundra, the sky finally cleared, revealing a breathtaking view of the aurora borealis. The lights danced and shimmered, casting an otherworldly glow over the snowy landscape. We stood in awe, cameras clicking, laughter and excitement filling the air. But as the vibrant colors swirled above, a sudden gust of wind brought with it an unsettling sound. Whispers, faint and eerie, carried on the Arctic breeze. "Did you hear that?" Lena asked, lowering her camera. We all fell silent, listening. The whispers grew louder, almost discernible, but still just out of reach. "It's just the wind," Eric said, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. "The Arctic can play tricks on your mind." As the night wore on, the whispers persisted, mingling with the howling wind. Unease settled over our camp, and sleep was elusive. I lay in my sleeping bag, staring at the canvas of the tent, trying to make sense of the voices that seemed to call my name. The next day, we continued our trek deeper into the Arctic. The whispers followed us, sometimes soft and distant, other times loud and insistent. They seemed to beckon us, drawing us further into the frozen wilderness. Eric tried to keep spirits high, but the tension was palpable. That evening, as we set up camp, Alex and Mia decided to investigate the source of the whispers. Despite Eric's protests, their curiosity got the better of them. "We'll just take a quick look," Alex said, shouldering his pack. "We're not going far." Reluctantly, Eric agreed, but insisted they stay within sight of the camp. As darkness fell, the rest of us gathered around the fire, waiting for their return. The whispers grew louder, almost taunting. Hours passed, and there was still no sign of Alex and Mia. Eric's worry deepened, and he finally decided to go after them. "Stay here," he instructed. "I'll be back soon." The remaining 4 of us huddled by the fire, our nerves frayed. The whispers seemed to close in, and I could feel a cold dread creeping into my bones. Then, through the darkness, we saw a figure approaching. It was Alex, stumbling back into the camp, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. "Where's Mia?" Sarah asked, rushing to his side. Alex shook his head, his voice barely a whisper. "She's gone. The whispers. They took her." Before we could react, another figure emerged from the shadows. Mia, but not as we had known her. Her eyes were empty, her face twisted into a mask of fear. She moved with a jerky, unnatural gait, as if being controlled by an unseen force. We backed away, horror gripping us. Mia's mouth opened, and the whispers poured forth, a cacophony of voices that chilled us to the core. "Run!" Eric shouted, emerging from the darkness behind her. "We have to get out of here!" We fled into the night, the whispers chasing us, growing louder and more insistent. The spectral entity that had taken Mia's form followed, its presence a palpable terror. We stumbled through the snow, fear driving us onward. Lena was the first to fall, her screams swallowed by the wind as the entity closed in. One by one, the whispers claimed my companions, each encounter more horrifying than the last. Finally, It was just Eric and me, running blindly through the frozen wasteland. The whispers seemed to come from all directions, surrounding us. "We can't keep running," Eric panted, his breath forming clouds in the icy air. "We have to face it." As if on cue, the spectral entity appeared before us, its form shifting and writhing. It mirrored our deepest fears, becoming a grotesque amalgamation of the horrors that haunted us. I felt a cold hand grip my heart as the entity transformed into a figure from my past, a friend who had died tragically, whose loss I had never fully come to terms with. The sight of her, twisted and tormented, brought me to my knees. Eric stood beside me, his own fears reflected in the entity's form. "We have to confront it," he said, his voice trembling. "We have to face our fears." Drawing on every ounce of courage, I forced myself to stand, to look into the eyes of the spectral figure. The whispers grew louder, almost deafening, but I pushed through the terror, focusing on the memory of my friend, as she had been in life, not the twisted specter before me. "I'm not afraid," I whispered, though my voice shook. "You don't control me." Eric did the same, facing his own fears, with a resolve that seemed to weaken the entity. The whispers began to fade, the figure losing its form, its power diminishing. With a final, defiant shout, we drove the entity back, its form dissolving into the icy air. The whispers ceased, leaving only the howling wind and the vast, silent expanse of the Arctic. Exhausted and shaken, Eric and I made our way back to the remains of our camp. The others were gone, claimed by the whispers, their fate a haunting reminder of the terror we had faced. In the days that followed, we managed to find our way back to Svalbard, guided by a grim determination to survive. The experience had left us scarred, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between us. We never spoke of the whispers, of the spectral entity that had mirrored our deepest fears. Some things, we agreed, were better left buried in the frozen wastelands of the Arctic. But even now, as I sit in the warmth and safety of my home, I can't escape the feeling that the whispers are still out there, carried on the Arctic wind, waiting for their next victim. And I know that the true terror of the Arctic is not the cold or the isolation, but the darkness that lies within us all, waiting to be awakened by the whispers in the wind. In the shadowed outskirts of a long-forgotten town stood Hollow Hall, an abandoned school whose ivy-clad walls harbored whispers of a chilling past. Once a bustling institution filled with the laughter of children, it now lay in ruins, its classrooms empty, save for the ghosts of memories, and one other. Legend told of the ghost of Hollow Hall, a spectral presence bound within the crumbling stone and broken glass. It was said that the ghost was the spirit of Eleanor Rigby, a young teacher who vanished without a trace one stormy night decades ago. Her story was etched into the lore of the local town. Her disappearance marked the beginning of the school's rapid decline and eventual abandonment. Curiosity drew 3 teenagers, Alice, Mark, and Jody, to the gates of Hollow Hall one fateful evening. They were thrill-seekers, armed with flashlights and a camera, determined to capture proof of the supernatural. The night was particularly dark, the moon obscured by swirling clouds, as if the sky itself warned against their intrusion. As they entered the main hallway, their flashlights flickered across peeling paint and shattered trophies, the air thick with the musty scent of decay. Their voices echoed strangely, as if absorbed by the walls, which seemed to pulsate subtly with a life of their own. "Did you hear that?" Jody whispered, pausing. A soft sobbing sounded from the end of the corridor. The group followed the noise, drawn to a classroom at the far end of the hall. The door creaked ominously as they pushed it open, revealing a chalkboard still etched with lessons long since forgotten. The sobbing grew louder, and then, as abruptly as it had begun, it stopped. The air grew colder, and in the beam of their flashlights, they saw it. A figure, translucent and shimmering, standing by the teacher's desk. It was Eleanor, her expression one of sorrow and fear, her mouth moving silently. "She's trying to tell us something," Mark said, stepping closer. His foot hit a loose floorboard, and suddenly, a whirlwind of papers circled the room, old assignments and photographs that had hidden beneath the floor. As they fluttered to the ground, one caught Alice's eye. It was a photo of Eleanor, but behind her was another figure, a shadowed silhouette that seemed all too familiar. The air shifted, and the ghost of Eleanor pointed towards the back of the classroom. Hesitantly, they approached a large, old wooden cabinet. Inside, hidden beneath a false bottom, lay a dusty, leather-bound journal. Alice opened the journal, and the pages revealed a tale not just of a schoolteacher, but of a woman ensnared in a forbidden love, a love with someone marked by darkness. The entries detailed her fears of being followed, of seeing shadows where there were none, of whispers that spoke in the dead of night. As the last page turned, the ground beneath them trembled, the walls of the classroom distorted, stretching and groaning as if in pain. Eleanor's ghost gestured frantically towards the exit, her face contorted in a silent scream. They ran, the hallways now alive with the sounds of a building groaning under the weight of its haunted past. They burst out into the night, the school's doors slamming shut behind them with a resounding boom. Panting, they looked back. Eleanor's figure appeared one last time at the window, her hand pressed against the glass before she faded away, her expression one of relief. The next day, compelled by the night's horrors, Alice returned alone. Stepping into the light of day, the school seemed less menacing. She approached the classroom they had fled. There, on the desk where Eleanor had stood, was a final message written in the dust. "Thank you." Alice realized then that their intrusion had not disturbed the ghost, but had liberated her. The love that had once threatened Eleanor's life had kept her bound to this place, and uncovering her story, had set her spirit free. As Alice left Hollow Hall for the last time, the sun broke through the clouds, casting light into the dark corners of the school, as if in a final farewell. Hollow Hall would continue to stand, abandoned and decaying, but no longer a prison for the ghost of Eleanor Rigby. Ever since the old puppeteer moved in next door, I felt an inexplicable chill whenever I passed his house. The neighborhood kids whispered about the attic, saying it was crammed with figures that mirrored us in uncanny ways. At first, it seemed like just another urban legend. That was until Jessie disappeared. Jessie was a firecracker, always the first to knock on the new neighbor's door with a plate of cookies. She came back with stories of shelves cluttered with dozens of puppets. "He's got one that looks just like me," she laughed nervously. A week later, Jessie was gone. Her family moved away shortly after, heartbroken and without answers. Curiosity, that feral and sometimes foolish thing, got the better of me one stormy evening when the wind whispered secrets through the trees. With Jessie's memory haunting me, I decided to visit the old puppeteer. He welcomed me with a benign smile, his eyes twinkling behind thick glasses. The attic was more disturbing than I imagined. Puppets hung from every inch of the space, their glassy eyes reflecting the storm outside. And there, among the wooden bodies, was Jessie's puppet. It wasn't just a vague resemblance. It was Jessie, down to the freckles and the way her hair curled. "I see you found your friend." The puppeteer's voice sliced through the silence, smooth as the blade he used to carve his pup. "Where's Jessie?" My voice was a hoarse whisper. "She's here. They're all here. They wanted to be immortal. I just helped them," he replied, gesturing around the room. I turned to run, but he was quicker. His old hands were strong, and his grip was iron. "It's a rare gift," he hissed, his face inches from mine. That was the last thing I remember before darkness took me. When I woke, I was staring at the attic ceiling, unable to move. Panicking, I tried to scream, but no sound came out. I was not breathing. I did not need to breathe anymore. Hours passed, or maybe days. Time has little meaning when you're suspended from the ceiling by strings. The puppeteer worked around me, occasionally humming a tune that sounded like a lullaby or a dirge. Then, the door creaked open, and a new figure entered, the spitting image of a boy from down the street. The puppeteer welcomed him. As the boy looked up, his eyes met mine. I wanted to warn him, to scream, to do anything to save him from my fate. But I could only watch in silent horror as the puppeteer approached him, his smile never wavering. The realization came crashing down like the thunder outside. We were his collection, preserved forever in carved wood and painted smiles. The puppeteer didn't just animate puppets, he trapped souls. I am no longer a spectator to this horror, but a part of it, forever suspended, watching the room fill slowly with familiar faces, each as helpless as the last. And outside, the world moves on, unaware of the attic where the puppets watch and wait, forever caught in the gaze of their creator. I'd been driving a taxi for decades, but I'd never encountered anything as bizarre as the mirror in my latest cab. It started on a dreary Tuesday evening when the rain drummed relentlessly on the roof, setting the stage for a night I'd never forget. My first passenger was a middle-aged woman, her face drawn with fatigue. As I glanced in the rearview mirror to confirm she was settled, I froze. The reflection staring back at me wasn't the tired lines and graying hair of the woman who'd entered my cab. Instead, it showed a monstrous version of her, with bulging eyes and a twisted, gaping mouth full of sharp, jagged teeth. I blinked, and the image snapped back to normal. Shaken, I dismissed it as a trick of my tired mind. Next, a businessman hopped in, talking loudly on his phone. Again, I peeked in the mirror. This time, his face was distorted beyond recognition. His eyes were sunk deep into their sockets, his skin sallow and pulled taut over his skull, and his lips moved in a horrifying grimace as he spoke. He looked perfectly normal as I eyed him directly, but the mirror told a different, ghastly tale. I shuddered, my hands trembling slightly on the wheel. Each passenger that night revealed a new terror in the mirror. A young couple showed as decaying corpses, their flesh rotting, eyes hollow. A cheery old man appeared as a sinister figure with dark, empty sockets where his eyes should be, and a smile that was too wide, too sharp. Panic clawed at my throat. What was happening? Was I losing my mind? Or was the mirror cursed, revealing some hidden, malevolent essence of these people? Driven by a need to understand, I picked up an old, tattered book on supernatural occurrences at a rundown bookshop on my break. Flipping through the pages under the dim light of my cab's interior lamp, I learned of an ancient entity known as the Seer of Souls, A mirror spirit said to reveal the true nature of a person's soul through their reflection. Determined to rid myself of the mirror's torment, I decided to confront whatever force inhabited it. That night, as the city slumbered, I parked in a deserted alley, the book open on my lap, and stared into the mirror. "Show yourself," I demanded, my voice steady despite the fear that gripped me. "What do you want from me?" The air in the cab thickened, and the temperature dropped. The mirror rippled like the surface of a disturbed pond, and then, there it was. A face, neither male nor female, beautiful yet terrifying, its eyes piercingly bright and knowing. "You see them as they truly are," the spirit whispered, its voice echoing around the cab. "Each soul bears marks of their lives, their choices, their essence. You are chosen to see beyond the veil." "Why me?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. "You have the gift of sight and the strength to face the truth," it replied, before the face faded, leaving the mirror blank. From that night on, every reflection showed the horrifying truth of my passengers, but understanding my purpose, I felt a resolve settle within me. I was a keeper of secrets, a silent witness to the hidden depths of humanity. Though it was a burden, it was also a gift, one that I would carry as I navigated the shadowy streets of the city, always aware of the unseen realities that lurk beneath the surface. I'm usually not the superstitious type, but tonight's shift driving the cab changed that. The night was exceptionally foggy, the kind where the air feels thick and you can barely see 2 meters ahead. Every passenger I picked up, strangely more than usual, whispered the same address before sinking into a deep silence. The address, 45 Meridian Hill, was known to me as a local legend. A sprawling mansion tangled in ghost stories, tied to a century-old mystery of a vanished family. Each time I typed the address into the GPS, a chill ran down my spine, yet my curiosity was piqued. The first passenger was an elderly woman dressed in a black lace dress, clutching a faded, leather-bound book. She didn't speak other than to give the address. As we approached the mansion, she vanished from my back seat as I pulled into the drive. I turned around bewildered, finding the car empty but for her book left on the seat. I shrugged it off as a trick of the light or my imagination. But then came the next passenger, a young man with a pallor to his skin that seemed almost unnatural. He too spoke only to give the address and disappeared as we arrived. With each new passenger, 6 in total, the pattern repeated. Each time an item was left behind: a silver locket, a gentleman's hat, a child's doll, a worn-out key, a pair of spectacles. Each object felt heavy with history, humming with a silent story. By the time the last passenger entered my cab, I was on edge, my hands trembling slightly as I drove. She was a young woman, her eyes sad and knowing. She broke the pattern by speaking softly during the drive. "You must wonder why we all go to the same place," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, glancing at her in the rearview mirror. "And why none of you stay in the car once we get there?" She smiled, a small, sorrowful curve of her lips. "Tonight is the centenary of the unsolved mystery. We're all tied to that house, bound by our last memories within its walls. We can't leave, not until the mystery is resolved." As we pulled up to the now dilapidated mansion, she handed me a crumpled newspaper clipping. It was an article about the family that disappeared, the very same night a century ago. "Help us," she whispered, and then she too was gone. I was alone, standing in front of the mansion with the newspaper article and the objects left behind. The house loomed, its dark windows like hollow eyes watching. Driven by a force I couldn't explain, I used the old key to enter. Inside, the air was musty with decay, the silence a tangible weight. I moved from room to room, guided by an inexplicable knowledge of where to go. In what must have been a study, I found a hidden door behind a bookshelf, leading down to a cellar. The air grew colder as I descended. At the bottom, I found a room set up like a shrine, with pictures of each passenger from tonight, and their belongings set around an old, dusty tome. I opened the book to find it was a diary belonging to the last owner of the house. Reading by the light of my phone, the diary revealed the truth, a tale of betrayal and a hidden affair that led to a tragic family poisoning, a crime pinned on an innocent servant who cursed the family before taking her own life. The entries ended abruptly, but it was clear what needed to be done. I gathered the items, laid them in a circle, and set them ablaze, hoping to free the spirits tied to the house. The fire burned strangely bright, the flames reaching high into the air without consuming anything else. As the fire died down, the air shifted, growing lighter. I exited the cellar to see the dawn breaking, the first light in years to touch the forsaken mansion. As I left, I felt a sense of release, not just from the house, but within myself. I never drove the cab again after that night. The mansion was demolished shortly after, the land left barren, a silent testament to the mystery it once cradled. But sometimes, on foggy nights, I find myself driving past where 45 Meridian Hill once stood, and I swear I can see figures in the mist, waving in gratitude, or perhaps in farewell.